Thales. Thales, who lived in the 6th century BC, is accepted as the first philosopher in history. Before him, people explained the universe through mythology. Thales, however, tried to explain the universe through reason and observation. According to him, the fundamental substance of everything in the universe was water. It is also said that he was interested in mathematics and astronomy, and that he predicted a solar eclipse in advance. One of his famous sayings is, "The hardest thing is to know yourself. The easiest thing is to give advice to others." Anaximander. Anaximander was a Greek philosopher and a student of Thales. While Thales said that the foundation of the universe was water, Anaximander said that the source of the universe was an infinite and indefinite entity he called apeiron. According to him, all things in the universe emerge from this infinite source and eventually return to it again. It is said that Anaximander drew one of the first maps of the world and developed ideas about the structure of the universe. One of his famous sayings is, "Things pay penalty and reparation to one another according to where they arise." Pythagoras. Pythagoras was an ancient Greek philosopher and mathematician. He left great influences in both mathematics and philosophy. According to Pythagoras, numbers are at the foundation of the universe. The order in nature, music, motion, and even the structure of the universe can be explained with numbers. Pythagoras is also known for the very famous Pythagorean theorem in mathematics. This theorem explains the relationship between the sides of right triangles and is one of the cornerstones of mathematics. Pythagoras and his students also thought not only about mathematics but also about morality and the soul. In short, Pythagoras says, everything is number. Heraclitus. Heraclitus was an ancient Greek philosopher who lived in the 6th and 5th centuries BC and is known in the history of philosophy for the idea of change. According to Heraclitus, the most fundamental reality in the universe is constant change. Nothing remains the same. Everything is in a state of change. He also argued that there is an order in the universe and that there is a reason that governs this order. He called this order logos. His most famous saying is, "You cannot step into the same river twice." Parmenides. Parmenides was another Greek philosopher who lived in the 5th century BC. In the history of philosophy, he is accepted as one of the founders of the philosophy of being. He put forward a very different view about the universe. According to Parmenides, being is one and infinite, and change does not exist. People think they see change, but in fact, this is an illusion. Because what is real does not change. What exists continues to exist forever. This idea is completely opposite to Heraclitus' thought that everything changes. In the history of philosophy, there is a great opposition of thought between these two philosophers. Parmenides' famous saying is, "Being is, non-being is not." Empedocles. Empedocles is one of the ancient Greek philosophers who lived in the 5th century BC. He holds an important place among the natural philosophers and is known as one of the thinkers who tried to explain the structure of the universe. Empedocles says that everything in the universe is made of these 4 basic elements: earth, water, air, and fire. These 4 elements form the basis of all beings in the universe, and changes in nature occur through the combination or separation of these elements. He also argued that there are 2 fundamental forces to explain movement in nature: love, the uniting force, and hate, the separating force. According to him, the changes in the universe occur under the influence of these 2 forces. One of Empedocles' most well-known sayings is, "Nothing in nature comes from nothing, and nothing ever disappears." Democritus. Democritus was a Greek philosopher known for his atomic theory. According to him, all beings in the universe are composed of very small and indivisible particles. He called these particles atoms. This idea has been accepted as a thought very close to the modern scientific understanding of the atom. Democritus also argued that a person should live a happy life. He said that true happiness is found not in excessive pleasures but in a simple and balanced life. His famous saying is, "Nothing exists except atoms and the void. Everything else is opinion." Socrates. Socrates was an ancient Greek philosopher who lived in the 5th century BC and is considered one of the most important thinkers of Western philosophy. While the philosophers before him mostly tried to understand nature and the universe, he directed the focus of philosophy toward human beings, morality, and the right way of living. Socrates' most famous method was asking questions. He would talk with people and constantly ask them questions, thus making them question their own thoughts. This method is known today as the Socratic method. Socrates did not leave any written works. His students conveyed his ideas to the present day. Especially Plato mentioned him frequently in his works. The ideas of Socrates were considered dangerous in Athens, and he was tried on the charge of misleading the youth. As a result of the trial, he was sentenced to death and lost his life by drinking hemlock poison. Despite this, Socrates is considered one of the strongest symbols of the search for truth and questioning thought in the history of philosophy. His most famous saying is, "The only thing I know is that I know nothing." Plato. Plato was an ancient Greek philosopher who lived in the 4th century BC and is one of the most important thinkers of Western philosophy. By developing the ideas of the famous thinker Socrates, he established a great philosophical system. One of Plato's most important ideas is the theory of forms. According to him, the world people see is not reality itself. Reality exists in the world of forms, which are unchanging and perfect. The things we see in this world are only reflections of these forms. Plato founded a school in Athens called the Academy. This school is considered one of the first institutions of higher education in history, and many philosophers were educated there. Even the famous philosopher Aristotle was one of Plato's students. Plato became one of the most influential philosophers in the history of philosophy, with his ideas in metaphysics, politics, and epistemology. One of his famous sayings is, "Wise men speak because they have something to say. Fools speak because they have to say something." Diogenes. Diogenes is an ancient Greek philosopher who lived in the 4th century BC and is one of the most influential representatives of Cynic philosophy. Diogenes is known for his extraordinary lifestyle that criticized the rules of society and the artificial needs of people. According to Diogenes, people lose their true freedom by chasing unnecessary wealth, fame, and luxury. He said that if people want to live a happy life, they must live a life that is simple, independent, and in harmony with nature. For this reason, Diogenes often lived an extremely simple life, and according to some sources, even lived in a barrel or a large jar. One of Diogenes' most famous actions was walking through the streets during the daytime with a lantern in his hand. When people asked him what he was doing, it is said that he replied, "I am looking for an honest man." This behavior was a symbolic act he used to criticize the hypocrisy in society. In another famous story, Diogenes' encounter with Alexander the Great is told. According to legend, when Alexander asked Diogenes if he had any request, Diogenes simply said, "Stand out of my sunlight, I want nothing else." One of Diogenes' most well-known sayings about humanity and society is, "I am a citizen of the world." Aristotle. Aristotle was another ancient Greek philosopher who lived in the 4th century BC and is considered one of the greatest thinkers in the history of philosophy. Although he was a student of Plato, he developed different systems of thought over time. Aristotle tried to reach knowledge by studying nature and living beings. He conducted studies in many different fields such as logic, biology, ethics, politics, and physics. According to Aristotle, true knowledge is obtained not only through abstract thinking, but also through observation and experience. Aristotle is also considered the founder of logic. He systematically presented the rules of logic that enable people to think correctly. He said that balance and moderation are necessary for a person to live a good life. With the comprehensive system of thought he developed, Aristotle became one of the most important philosophers who influenced not only philosophy, but also science and education for centuries. One of Aristotle's most famous sayings is, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit." Epicurus. Epicurus was an ancient Greek philosopher who lived in the 4th and 3rd centuries BC and was the founder of the philosophical school called Epicureanism. The main aim of his philosophy was for human beings to live a happy and peaceful life. According to Epicurus, happiness is found not in excessive pleasures but in a simple life, friendship, and inner peace. In his opinion, most people become unhappy because of unnecessary fears. He especially argued that the fear of death is meaningless. Epicurus believed that the universe is made of atoms. Events in nature occur not through the intervention of gods but through the laws of nature. One of Epicurus's important sayings is, "Fearing death is meaningless because when we exist, death is not present, and when death is present, we no longer exist." Zeno of Citium. Zeno of Citium was an ancient Greek philosopher who lived in the 4th and 3rd centuries BC and is known as the founder of Stoicism. Stoicism is a philosophy that argues that a person must use reason and control their emotions in order to live a happy and peaceful life. According to Zeno, people should not be upset about things they cannot control in their lives, because true wisdom is understanding that a person can control only their own thoughts and actions. For this reason, the Stoics argue that living in accordance with nature and virtue is the right way. Zeno taught his ideas in Athens in a columned structure called the Stoa. The name Stoicism also comes from here. This philosophy later had a great influence in the Roman period and was developed by many philosophers. Stoicism is still considered one of the most popular intelligent life strategies today, from Silicon Valley CEOs to professional athletes. One of his most famous sayings, considered a cornerstone of his philosophy in the Stoic school, is, "Nature gave us two ears but only one mouth, so that we may listen twice as much as we speak." Augustine of Hippo. Augustine of Hippo was an important medieval philosopher and Christian thinker who lived in the 4th and 5th centuries AD. He is considered one of the first great philosophers who combined ancient Greek thought with Christian belief in Western philosophy. Augustine says that the way to reach true knowledge is not only through reason. A person also needs the guidance of God. According to him, the inner world of the human being, the soul, and the relationship with God are among the most important subjects of philosophy. Augustine also developed important ideas about the concept of time. The past, the future, and the present are actually concepts that exist in human consciousness. One of his most famous works is the book Confessions. This work is an important piece in which he explains both his philosophical and personal thoughts. One of his sayings is, "I believe in order to understand." Al-Farabi. Al-Farabi was a great Islamic philosopher who lived in the 9th and 10th centuries and is considered one of the most important thinkers in the Islamic world. He studied the ideas of the ancient Greek philosophers Plato and Aristotle and tried to combine them with Islamic thought. According to Al-Farabi, the greatest goal of human beings is to reach happiness. He believed that people should reach knowledge by using their reason and live a virtuous life. He also argued that wise and virtuous rulers are necessary for society to be governed well. Al-Farabi also put forward important ideas in political philosophy. He said that the best societies are the ones where people are the most knowledgeable and the most virtuous. The saying considered the heart of his philosophy is, "The greatest of virtues is the union of knowledge and justice." Ibn Sina. Ibn Sina was a great philosopher and scientist who lived in the 10th and 11th centuries. He is considered one of the most influential thinkers of the Middle Ages in both the Islamic world and Europe. He conducted important studies in many fields such as philosophy, medicine, mathematics, and astronomy. In his philosophy, Ibn Sina especially developed ideas about being and God. This idea is considered a very important concept in metaphysics. Ibn Sina is also known for his famous medical book, The Canon of Medicine. This work was taught for centuries in European universities as a fundamental source in medicine. One of Ibn Sina's sayings is, "There is no incurable disease except the lack of will. There is no worthless plant except the one that is not recognized." Al-Ghazali. Al-Ghazali was a great Islamic thinker and philosopher who lived in the 11th and 12th centuries. He is considered an important thinker who had great influence in both philosophy and Sufism in the Islamic world. Al-Ghazali examined the debates about reason and philosophy and criticized the views of some philosophers. One of his most famous works is the book The Incoherence of the Philosophers. In this work, he argued that the ideas of some philosophers were mistaken. According to Al-Ghazali, a person can reach the truth not only through reason but also through faith and spiritual experience. Therefore, the most correct way to reach knowledge is to use both reason and belief together. One of Al-Ghazali's most famous and profound sayings, summarizing the human journey toward inner truth, is, "The heart is the sea, and the tongue is the shore. Whatever is in the sea washes up on the shore." Another well-known saying of Al-Ghazali about knowledge and ignorance is, "Do not argue with the ignorant. I have never defeated them." Ibn Rushd. Ibn Rushd was an important Islamic philosopher and thinker who lived in the 12th century. He lived in Al-Andalus and became especially known for interpreting the works of the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle. For this reason, he was known in Europe by the name Averroes. In Ibn Rushd's philosophy, reason and religion do not actually contradict each other. People should use their reason to understand the universe, and philosophy is one of the important ways to understand the truth. Ibn Rushd also presented arguments against Al-Ghazali, who criticized the ideas of philosophers. According to Ibn Rushd, philosophy and science can exist together with religious thought. One of his most famous sayings that summarizes his philosophy and scientific stance is, "Knowledge is not a possession. It is a treasure that increases when shared. Reason is the only way to find this treasure." Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas was a distinguished medieval philosopher and Christian thinker who lived in the 13th century. He is considered one of the most important representatives of scholastic philosophy in the Middle Ages. Aquinas tried to combine the ideas of the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle with Christian theology. In his philosophy, reason and faith do not contradict each other. Instead, they work together to lead people to the truth. One of Thomas Aquinas' most important works is the book Summa Theologica. In this book, he tried to explain the existence of God and presented the famous philosophical arguments known as the 5 ways to prove God's existence. One of his most famous sayings is, "Grace does not destroy nature, it perfects it." William of Ockham. William of Ockham was an English philosopher who lived in the 14th century and is considered one of the important thinkers of medieval philosophy. He is especially known for his studies in logic and epistemology. Occam's most famous idea is the principle known as Occam's razor. According to this principle, a necessary assumption should not be made when explaining something. If an event has multiple explanations, the simplest explanation is usually the one closest to the truth. Occam also thought about the relationship between reason and faith. According to him, some subjects can only be understood through faith, and reason cannot explain everything. The most famous statement of the principle, known as Occam's razor, is, "Entities should not be multiplied without necessity." Niccolò Machiavelli. Niccolò Machiavelli was an Italian philosopher and political thinker who lived in the 15th and 16th centuries. He is known as one of the most important political thinkers of the Renaissance period. Machiavelli was one of the first thinkers to examine politics independently from moral and religious rules. According to him, for a state to be strong and stable, a ruler may sometimes need to make tough and pragmatic decisions. In his book The Prince, he explains how a ruler can gain and maintain power. With his realistic and sometimes harsh political ideas, Machiavelli became one of the thinkers who laid the foundations of modern political philosophy. One of his sayings is, "The end justifies the means." Michel de Montaigne. Michel de Montaigne was a French philosopher who lived in the 16th century and is one of the important thinkers of the Renaissance. He is considered one of the most humanistic and skeptical geniuses of the Renaissance. Instead of building grand theories, he chose to explore the depths of his own mind and ask, "What do I actually know, and how much do I know?" He is especially known for his writings on human nature, knowledge, and individual thought. Montaigne's most distinctive feature is that he expressed his ideas through a type of writing called the essay. For this reason, he is considered the founder of the essay genre in the history of literature and philosophy. His most famous work is the book Essays. Montaigne argued that humans cannot know everything with certainty and therefore should have a questioning and critical way of thinking. A person should try to know themselves and question their own thoughts. The famous phrase engraved on his medallion that summarizes his philosophy is, "What do I know?" Desiderius Erasmus. Desiderius Erasmus was a Dutch philosopher who lived in the 15th and 16th centuries and was one of the most important humanist thinkers of the Renaissance. Humanism is a school of thought that emphasizes human reason, education, and the development of the individual. Erasmus was considered a leading figure of this humanist thought. He criticized dogmas, corrupt institutions, and human foolishness with sharp humor while always advocating tolerance and peace. Erasmus believed that education and reason were essential for people to build a better society. According to him, people can become more virtuous and conscious individuals through knowledge and education. In his book, In Praise of Folly, he critically described certain wrong behaviors and institutions in society. One of Erasmus's sayings is, "In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king." Thomas More. Thomas More was an English philosopher who lived in the 15th and 16th centuries. He was one of the most principled and stubborn geniuses of the Renaissance period. His intelligence was creative enough to imagine an ideal society that seemed impossible. Yet he was also firm enough to give his life for the values he believed in. He is especially known for his work called Utopia. In this book, More described an ideal society where people are equal, justice exists, and everyone works for the common good. The concept of utopia also emerged thanks to this work. These ideas later had a great influence on political philosophy. While More was serving as Lord Chancellor, the highest office in England, he fell into a deep disagreement with King Henry VIII. The king wanted to divorce his wife, Mary Anne Boleyn, and declare himself the head of the Church of England by rejecting the authority of the Pope. As a devout Catholic, More found this situation unacceptable both religiously and legally, and he was then sentenced to imprisonment. After a period of captivity, he was executed by being beheaded. One of his famous sayings has gone down in history, Those who remain silent are also accomplices. Giordano Bruno. Giordano Bruno was an Italian philosopher who lived in the 16th century. With the ideas he put forward about the structure of the universe, he gained an important place in the history of philosophy and science. He was not only a philosopher, but also a genius of cosmology who was willing to walk into the fire for his ideas. His mind was far ahead of his time and had discovered the infinity and boundlessness of the universe. Bruno argued that the universe is infinite and that there are countless stars and planetary systems in it, not just our solar system. He also claimed that stars are actually other suns and that many different worlds may exist in the universe. These ideas were considered very radical at that time. The church found Bruno's ideas dangerous, and after a long trial, he was executed. His most famous words, which summarize both his courage and his philosophical stance, were shouted at the judges during the trial in which he was sentenced to death. "Perhaps you who pronounce my sentence are in greater fear than I who receive it." Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon was an English philosopher who lived in the 16th and 17th centuries. He is considered the architect of the modern scientific method and the pioneer of empiricism. He transformed philosophy from empty debates into a practical tool that enables humans to understand and control nature. In his philosophy, the way to reach true knowledge is through observation and experiment. People can reach accurate knowledge by studying nature and conducting experiments. Bacon also stated that people fall into certain prejudices while thinking. These false ideas make it difficult for humans to reach the truth. His most well-known quote is, "Knowledge is power." René Descartes. René Descartes was a French philosopher and mathematician who lived in the 17th century. He is considered one of the founders of modern philosophy. Descartes argued that the most reliable way to reach knowledge is through reason and systematic thinking. He began philosophy with doubt. According to him, a person should doubt everything that they are not completely certain is true. Through this method, Descartes reached a single truth that cannot be doubted: the fact that we are thinking beings. This idea became the foundation of his philosophy. Descartes also made important contributions to mathematics and science and became one of the thinkers who developed analytic geometry. His most famous quote, known all over the world, is, "I think, therefore I am." Blaise Pascal. Blaise Pascal was a French philosopher who lived in the 17th century. Pascal was both a mathematical genius and a thinker who deeply felt the existential struggles of human beings. He moved between the certainty of numbers and the complexity of the human heart. Pascal developed deep reflections on human nature. According to Pascal, human beings are both very fragile and thinking creatures. Therefore, the greatest strength of human beings is their ability to think. He also put forward important ideas in the philosophy of religion. One of his most well-known ideas is known as Pascal's wager. According to this idea, believing in the existence of God may be a more rational choice than taking the risk of not believing. His quote that reflects his philosophy and his view of the human soul is, "The heart has its reasons which reason does not know." Baruch Spinoza. Baruch Spinoza is considered one of the most original and dangerous minds in the history of philosophy. He was so intelligent that he shook the society of his time, yet centuries later he was better understood by geniuses such as Einstein. Spinoza was a Dutch philosopher who lived in the 17th century. According to Spinoza, there is only one true reality in the universe, and this reality includes both God and nature. God and nature are actually different expressions of the same being. This idea is known in philosophy as the concept of God equals nature. Spinoza argued that in order for people to achieve true freedom, they must turn to reason and knowledge. As humans understand nature in themselves, they can become freer and happier. Albert Einstein admired Spinoza's intellect and view of the universe so much that when he was asked, "Do you believe in God?" his answer became famous in the history of science and philosophy. "I believe in Spinoza's God who reveals himself in the harmony of all that exists, not in a God who concerns himself with the fate and actions of human beings." One of the most famous quotes attributed to Spinoza is, "A free person speaks not of death, but of life." John Locke. John Locke was an English philosopher who lived in the 17th century. He is one of the most important representatives of the philosophical movement known as empiricism. According to Locke, the human mind is like a blank slate when a person is born. This idea is known as tabula rasa. According to him, people are not born with knowledge. Knowledge is gained through experience and observation. Locke also put forward important ideas in political philosophy. According to Locke, people have natural rights such as life, liberty, and property. The role of the state is to protect these rights. His most famous statement, as mentioned in the text, is, "The mind of a newborn is like a blank slate." Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz was a German philosopher who lived in the 17th and 18th centuries. He was not only a philosopher, but also a universal genius who made great contributions to mathematics, physics, law, and history. According to this genius, the universe is composed of small, indivisible, and spiritual entities that he called monads. These monads are the fundamental building blocks of the universe, and each of them reflects the universe from its own perspective. Leibniz also made important contributions to mathematics, especially to the development of differential and integral calculus. He also gained an important place by discovering the derivative independently at the same time as Isaac Newton. He also played a role in developing the binary number system 0-1, which forms the foundation of modern computers. In his philosophy, Leibniz argued that God created the universe in the best possible way. His most famous quote is, "We live in the best of all possible worlds." David Hume. David Hume was a Scottish philosopher who lived in the 18th century. Hume is mostly known for the ideas he developed about empiricism and skepticism. He is one of the most destructive and shocking minds of the Enlightenment age. His genius shattered the forms of reasoning that had been accepted as true for thousands of years. According to Hume, human knowledge comes only from experience and observation. People understand the world through their experiences and reach knowledge in this way. For this reason, Hume argued that reason cannot know everything with certainty. Hume also questioned the concept of causality. Society thinks that there is a definite cause and effect relationship between events, but in fact, this idea is often based only on habits. The most famous and provocative quote that summarizes the philosophy of this Scottish philosopher, who awakened Kant from his dogmatic slumber, is, "Reason is the slave of the passions and ought to be so." So what does this quote mean? With this statement, Hume challenges the definition that has existed since ancient Greece that man is a rational animal. According to Hume, reason alone cannot initiate any action. What moves us to act are our desires, fears, and passions. Reason is only a tool that finds the most appropriate way to achieve these goals. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was a French philosopher who lived in the 18th century and was one of the most rebellious and emotional philosophers of the Enlightenment age. Rousseau is known for the ideas he developed about political philosophy and society. He was shocking enough to argue that civilization corrupts humans instead of improving them, and visionary enough to shape modern democracy and the education system. Rousseau says that human nature is actually good and free, but the structure of society can corrupt people over time. According to him, the way to establish a just society is to create a government based on the common will of the people. Rousseau explained these ideas in his book called The Social Contract. This work played a major role in the development of modern democratic thought. His striking quote is as follows, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant was a German philosopher who lived in the 18th century and is one of the greatest thinkers of the Enlightenment period. Kant created a very important turning point in modern philosophy. He is the most disciplined, most systematic, and perhaps the most difficult mind in the history of philosophy. He is almost like a traffic policeman in philosophy. He separated with clear lines what reason can know and what it can never know. For some people, philosophy is even divided into before Kant and after Kant. In Kant's philosophy, knowledge does not come only from experience. The structure of the human mind also shapes knowledge. In other words, humans not only see the world as it is, but also interpret it through the structure of their minds. This idea created a major change in philosophy. Kant also put forward important ideas in moral philosophy. According to him, correct behavior is possible when people act according to universal moral rules. People should act not only by thinking about their own interests, but according to rules that could be valid for everyone. Kant's most famous quote, which summarizes both his understanding of morality and the full weight of his philosophy, and which was also engraved on his tombstone, is, "The starry sky above me and the moral law within me." Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Hegel was a German philosopher of the 19th century and one of the most complex and gigantic logic machines in the history of philosophy. Hegel sees the world not as a static place, but as a constantly conflicting and evolving flow. He is especially known for the ideas he developed about the development of history and thought. According to Hegel, history and thought are in a continuous process of development. To explain this process, he put forward a model of thinking called the dialectical method. According to this model, an idea emerges, an opposing idea develops against it, and these two ideas clash to form a new thought. He also argued that history does not progress randomly, but is a meaningful process in which human freedom develops over time. He saw history as a path of development in which humanity tries to understand its freedom and consciousness better and better. One of his famous quotes is, "What is rational is real, and what is real is rational." Arthur Schopenhauer. Arthur Schopenhauer was a German philosopher who lived in the 19th century and is especially known for his pessimistic philosophy. According to Schopenhauer, at the foundation of the universe, there is a blind and insatiable force that he called will. All living beings live in constant desire and striving under the influence of this will. Schopenhauer argued that human life is largely filled with suffering and dissatisfaction, because people constantly desire new things, and these desires are often not fully satisfied. For this reason, it is quite difficult for humans to reach true peace. Nevertheless, according to Schopenhauer, humans can distance themselves from this suffering to some extent through values such as art, aesthetics, and compassion. He especially thought that art and music could free humans, even if temporarily, from the pressure of this will. He is a genius who sees the world not through rose-colored glasses, but with its naked and harsh reality. His most famous quote that summarizes his entire philosophy, the tragic cycle between endless human desires and dissatisfaction, is, "Life swings like a pendulum between pain and boredom." Auguste Comte. Auguste Comte was a French philosopher who lived in the 19th century. Comte is the father of sociology and the founder of the positivism movement. He saw society not as a pile of chaos, but as a mechanism that works according to certain rules, just like the laws of physics. In his thought, true knowledge can only be obtained through scientific observation and experiment. Scientific methods should be used instead of metaphysical and abstract thoughts. Comte argued that human thought also develops over time. He explained this idea with the law of three stages. According to what he says, human thought passes through three stages. First, the theological stage, then the metaphysical stage, and finally the positive, that is, the scientific stage. Comte's most famous quote that expresses both his scientific and social vision is, "To know is to foresee is to be able." John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill is one of the brightest minds of the 19th century and the intellectual father of modern liberalism. He is English and is especially an important representative of the philosophy of utilitarianism. According to this philosophy, what determines whether an action is right or not is how much happiness it brings to people. The society Mill wants is a society where people can think freely and develop themselves. For this reason, Mill argued that individual freedom has great importance. Mill has a book called On Liberty. In this work, he explained that people should be able to express their thoughts freely and that society should be open to different ideas. The quote that indicates Mill's moral depth is, "It is better to be a dissatisfied human than a satisfied pig. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied." Søren Kierkegaard. Søren Kierkegaard is a Danish genius who lived in the 19th century, the father of existentialism, and the one who discovered the anxiety-filled depths of the human soul. He devoted himself to saving the single individual who gets lost in crowds and to making the human take responsibility for his own existence. He gave great importance to the inner world of the individual, to choices, and to freedom. According to Kierkegaard, a human must constantly make choices throughout life, and these choices determine who the human is. For a human to truly become himself, he must make choices freely and accept the responsibility of these choices. Kierkegaard argued that faith and individual experience are also important in human life. True faith can be understood not only through thought, but through the individual's own inner experience. His most famous quote that summarizes both his perception of time and the strange contradiction felt while living life is, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." Karl Marx. Karl Marx was a German philosopher, economist, and thinker who lived in the 19th century. Karl Marx is one of the minds that shook the modern world the most in economic and social terms by taking the history of philosophy from only thinking to the field of action. According to Marx's determination, throughout history societies have changed as a result of struggles between different classes. Especially in industrial society, the most important conflict occurs between the bourgeoisie, who own the means of production, and the working class, the proletariat, who sell their labor power. Marx argued that the capitalist system would increase inequalities over time, and that this situation would eventually lead to major social changes. He explained these ideas especially in his works called The Communist Manifesto and Capital. His most influential quote that radically changed his view of philosophy is, "Philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it." Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche is the most shocking, the most unconventional, and the most high-voltage mind in the history of philosophy. He practiced philosophy not in the silence of a library, but as if waiting for a storm on the top of a mountain. First of all, he is a German philosopher who lived in the 19th century and is one of the most influential thinkers of modern philosophy. He is known for his criticisms of morality, religion, and culture. According to Nietzsche, the traditional understanding of morality and the values imposed by society can limit the true potential of the human being. A person must create his own values and determine the meaning of his own life. Nietzsche also introduced the concept of the Übermensch. This concept expresses the human being overcoming himself and becoming a stronger and freer individual. In short, Nietzsche is an important philosopher who deeply influenced 19th century philosophy with his ideas about human freedom, the will to power, and the ability to create values. His famous and chilling cry that radically shook all the values of modern humanity is, "God is dead. We have killed him. You and I, we are all his murderers." Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell is one of the most important British philosophers of the 20th century. He is also known as a mathematician, logician, and social critic. Russell is considered one of the founders of analytic philosophy. He especially emphasized the importance of logic and language in philosophy. According to him, many philosophical problems arise from the misuse of language. Therefore, he argued that thoughts should be expressed clearly and logically. The work Principia Mathematica, which Russell wrote together with the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead in the fields of mathematics and logic, played a major role in the development of modern logic. Russell was not only interested in academic philosophy, but was also an active thinker on issues such as anti-war movements, free thought, and human rights. In 1950, he won the Nobel Prize in Literature. One of his most influential sayings is, "The problem with the world is that fools are so certain of themselves, while the intelligent are full of doubt." Martin Heidegger. Martin Heidegger is one of the deepest, darkest, and perhaps most language-challenging philosophers of the 20th century. He shook philosophy to its roots by claiming that philosophy has forgotten for thousands of years what being is. According to the German philosopher Martin Heidegger, the greatest question of philosophy was exactly this: what is being? Heidegger does not see the human as an ordinary living being. The human is the only being that is aware of its own existence. He calls this situation Dasein, that is, the state of being in the world. But modern life constantly keeps us busy. Technology, crowds, daily rush. And within this chaos, the human begins to forget their own existence. In Heidegger's philosophy, to truly live freely, a human must accept one reality, that we are mortal. Because realizing death allows us to live life more consciously. Explaining these ideas in Being and Time, Heidegger left a deep impact on philosophy regarding existence, time, and the human's place in the world. His most famous saying is, "Language is the house of being." Ludwig Wittgenstein. Austrian philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein is one of the most unusual, sharpest, and perhaps most obsessive minds in the history of philosophy. Wittgenstein argues that most philosophical problems are not actually problems, but rather mental cramps caused by the misuse of language. According to him, people sometimes try to go beyond the limits of words, and this creates confusion. Wittgenstein argues that the key to understanding the world lies in understanding language, because the thing that shapes our thoughts is the words we use. In one of his most important works, Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, he presents this famous idea: the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. In other words, the more concepts and words a person has, the more broadly they can understand the world. Wittgenstein's ideas deeply influenced the philosophy of language and modern analytic philosophy. Hannah Arendt. Does evil really arise only from evil people? Hannah Arendt, one of the most important thinkers of the 20th century, gave a very different answer to this question. As a Jew who had escaped from Nazi Germany, she analyzed how totalitarianism and evil could become so ordinary. She says that sometimes the greatest evils arise not from malicious people, but from ordinary people who simply act without thinking. Arendt explains this idea with the concept of the banality of evil. Sometimes people blindly obey authority and do not question the consequences of what they do. And this situation can lead to great disasters in history. She explained these ideas especially in her work Eichmann in Jerusalem. One of her famous sayings is, "The enemy of good is not evil, but the absence of thought." Jean-Paul Sartre. Jean-Paul Sartre is one of the charismatic and action-oriented philosophers of the 20th century. He did not leave philosophy only on dusty shelves in libraries. He carried it to the streets, to resistance movements, and to the responsibility of every individual to build their own life. The French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre asked the question, is a human born with a meaning, or do they create their own meaning? And he expressed his answer with these words, a human being does not have a predetermined essence. In other words, a human first comes into the world and then determines who they will become through their choices. This idea is the foundation of the philosophy of existentialism that he defended. According to Sartre, the human being is completely free. However, this freedom also brings great responsibility, because every choice we make determines not only ourselves, but also what kind of person we want to be. He explained these ideas in detail in his work, Being and Nothingness. The sentence that summarizes his philosophy in a single line is, existence precedes essence. Simone de Beauvoir. Simone de Beauvoir is not only a philosopher, she is one of the most striking figures of modern feminism, literature, and existentialism. She used her intellect to redefine the position of women in society and what freedom truly means. The French philosopher Simone says that being a woman is not only a biological condition. The rules and expectations of society also shape this identity. People are not born with specific social roles. Over time, society's expectations and culture create these roles. She discussed these ideas in detail in her book, The Second Sex. Her most famous saying is, one is not born but rather becomes a woman. Albert Camus. Albert Camus saw philosophy not as a system, but as a matter of passion for life and honesty, and became one of the most charismatic philosophers of the 20th century. With his intellect, he found the meaning of the universe absurd, and instead of submitting, began an honorable rebellion against this meaninglessness. According to the French thinker Albert Camus, the greatest problem of human beings is living in a meaningless universe with a mind that seeks meaning. Camus calls the situation the absurd. Humans constantly question whether life has a meaning or not. But the universe does not give clear answers to these questions. This conflict is the absurd condition that humans experience. In the face of this situation, instead of giving up, a person should continue living despite all the meaninglessness of life and create their own meaning. He explains these ideas in his work, The Myth of Sisyphus. One of Albert Camus's sayings is, "The only reason I do not kill myself is that I love living." Michel Foucault. Michel Foucault is one of the most striking philosophers of the 20th century, who looked into the dusty archives of history and saw how modern humans were turned into an object of control. He used philosophy as an art of taking the X-ray of a system. Is society truly free, or are we constantly being monitored without realizing it? The French philosopher Michel Foucault became curious about this question and investigated how power works in modern society. According to him, power is not only in states or rulers, it also exists secretly in schools, hospitals, prisons, and even in everyday life. Foucault said that modern society controls people not by openly forcing them, but through constant observation and surveillance. When people think they are being watched, they eventually begin to control themselves. He explained this idea especially in his work, Discipline and Punish. Michel Foucault's most famous saying is, "Knowledge is power." Noam Chomsky. According to the American thinker Noam Chomsky, the human brain is born ready to learn language. In other words, children do not learn language only by imitation. There is a natural structure in the human mind that enables understanding language. Chomsky explains this idea with the theory of universal grammar. Although there are different languages in the world, they all share a common structure at their core. This idea completely changed modern linguistics and made Chomsky one of the most influential figures in his field. Chomsky is also known for his criticisms of media and politics. According to him, large media organizations can often shape the thoughts of society. One of Noam Chomsky's most frequently quoted sayings is, "The role of propaganda in democracy is the same as the role of violence in totalitarian states." What Chomsky means in this statement is that in democratic societies, people are not directly controlled by force. Instead, people's thoughts and perceptions can be shaped through media and propaganda. You can learn more about these ideas in detail in his work Manufacturing Consent. Another thought-provoking statement of Chomsky is that one of the most important ways to understand power in the modern world is to examine how media and information are used. Noam Chomsky is still alive today. Jacques Derrida. Jacques Derrida is a genius who introduced the concept of deconstruction to the world of philosophy and showed that texts and language are not as innocent as they appear. He shows how slippery the ground actually is beneath the definitions we consider certain. Can a text really have only one meaning? According to Derrida, the meaning of a text is not fixed. Meaning is constantly recreated through the interpretation of the reader. Derrida says that to understand a text, it is not enough to look only at its visible meaning. The hidden contradictions and different interpretations within the text must also be examined. This approach created a major impact in literature, philosophy, and the social sciences. Derrida developed these ideas in his work of grammatology. One of Jacques Derrida's most well-known sayings is, "There is nothing outside the text." There is also another quote of Jacques Derrida that I like. "Only the unforgivable can be forgiven." A truly clever paradox. If something is already a forgivable mistake, then there is no real act of forgiveness there. That's all from me for now. See you in the next videos. If you liked the video, I would be happy if you press the like button and subscribe. And take care of yourself.